So my post today talks about a pelvic health, specifically postpartum pelvic health consensus paper, which was done quite a while ago. I'm just not getting around to posting about it. But essentially the paper was about, I don't know, like 30 really smart pelvic health people who came together and agreed on certain aspects about postpartum health and healing. The first thing is pelvic physical therapy can be helpful for healing in the postpartum period. I think we all know that by now, or hopefully know that by now. But the second thing that the paper spent a lot of time talking about is that it is currently advisable that women do not participate in high impact activities such as running until 3 months postpartum. And if they have symptoms, so urinary symptoms, bowel symptoms, pelvic organ prolapse symptoms, just to name a few, if you have symptoms, that it might be advisable to wait even longer, sometimes even up to 6 months. One of the things that is expanded upon in this paper is an area of the pelvis and pelvic floor called the urogenital hiatus, or the levator hiatus. Urogenital meaning bladder and vagina, and levator is essentially levator ani, which is the medical term for the pelvic floor muscles. So there is a hiatus. There is literally a gap in the pelvic floor, and I thought I'd show that to you today. So I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but essentially this is pubic bone. That little protrusion right there is tailbone. That is rectum. And then you see this little U-shaped gap in the pelvic floor. That is your urogenital hiatus, or your levator hiatus. Why is that important? Well, during pregnancy, that widens. During labor and delivery, that widens even further. And we know that that doesn't return closer to its original size until 12 months postpartum, and it actually never returns to its original size. Good news, vagina does return to its original size 6 to 8 weeks after delivery. However, this hiatus does not. And so that's really important, so that we have a wider gap than we ever have had. We know that correlates with pelvic organ prolapse. And then we add really intense exercise, high impact activity, and that can affect the bladder and the support for the vagina and uterus. And that's a really big deal. So we know that when your foot strikes the ground, that those forces are absorbed upward through the body, specifically through the pelvis and the pelvic floor. And so if we're repetitively straining that tissue that's a little bit weak and a little bit wider than normal, then that can be a concern in the long term. So we really want to focus on optimizing abdominal strength, optimizing pelvic floor strength, really encouraging a lot of postpartum healing prior to loading that tissue. Now, I am not always a huge believer in only doing things based on what research says. I think there's a lot of variables that come into play: the person's history and the context and their perceptions of, their health and wellness and where they are physically and mentally. I think there's a lot of components here. But in this instance, I really think this makes a lot of sense. And so, one of the things since this paper's come out is said, hey, you can run, but really it's not advisable. And here's the steps we'll take to get you back to running at that 3-month postpartum mark. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And if you have questions about that, feel free to let us know.